My name is Emily, and my story isn't just one of a daughter who got lost in the shuffle of family life. No, it's the story of someone who spent years trying to carve out her place, only to realize that the family she had always tried to fit into never saw her as a part of their perfect picture. I was 25 when it all came to a head, but I still remember the days when everything seemed normal. I was just a kid, trying to make sense of the world. My dad, John, was the kind of man who made you feel like the sun rose and set on you until it didn't. When I was younger, he was my world. He was the one who cheered the loudest at my school events, who stayed up late helping me with my math homework, who had that warm, reliable smile when he promised that everything would be okay. And then, my mother passed away when I was 12. I guess that's when things started to change, but I didn't realize it at the time. The hole my mom left in our lives was something I never thought could be filled, but my dad tried. He tried in the way that a man who had lost his partner could only try. He filled the silence with promises to move on, that life had to go on, and that we could make a new normal together. I didn't understand it then, but looking back, I know that for him, moving on meant finding someone to replace the role my mom had played, someone who would love him, and by extension, love me. And that person, as it turned out, was Stephanie. Stephanie came into our lives like a storm, brash, loud, and unapologetically bold. She was everything my dad wasn't, loud, overly confident, and unashamed of her own flaws. She wasn't particularly warm toward me at first, but I didn't think much of it. I was just a teenager, after all. I didn't really have a say in the matter. My dad was happy, and that's all that really mattered to him. Stephanie had 2 kids from her previous marriage, Ben and Lily. They were a package deal, and just like that, our family went from the 2 of us to 5. At first, I didn't mind the change. I'd always wanted a sibling, and the idea of having 2 new ones seemed exciting. But the excitement faded quickly. Ben, the older one, was a 10-year-old who seemed to hate me from day one, and Lily, at 7, was just too much for me to handle. She was loud, needy, and demanded attention at every turn. And from the very first moment they stepped into the house, it was clear to me that everything had shifted. They weren't just moving in, they were taking over. My dad was consumed by Stephanie's presence. They were in their own world, talking about vacations, shopping trips, and plans that didn't include me. But worse than that, they didn't care that I was there at all. I was the extra piece of the puzzle, the one that didn't quite fit anymore. My room, which had once been a sanctuary, became just another corner in the house, one that was often ignored or out of sight. In my own home, I felt like a stranger. The worst part was that my dad didn't see it. He never noticed how I was slowly disappearing from his life, replaced by this new family. He didn't even seem to care that I was fading. I'd come home from school to an empty house, spend evenings alone in my room, and when they did finally come home, the house would be filled with their laughter and noise. And no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't break into their world. Everything came to a head when I was 20. By then, I'd been living in the shadow of Stephanie's family for years, but I thought maybe things would improve once I was in college. I was independent. I had my own life to live. But that year, my dad dropped a bombshell. He and Stephanie were planning a honeymoon, a long one, and they were going to leave for 2 weeks. I should have been happy for them. They were finally taking the trip they had been talking about for years. But when my dad casually mentioned that I would need to look after Ben and Lily while they were gone, something inside me snapped. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice faltering. "Well, you're the only one here, Emily," he said, as if the answer was obvious. "You're an adult now. You can look after the kids while Stephanie and I are gone." I stared at him, disbelief spreading through my chest. He wasn't asking me, he was telling me. The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about helping out. This was about being treated like a servant in my own home. They were going to leave, just like they always did, and I was going to be stuck taking care of their kids. "What about their real dad?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Shouldn't he take them for the 2 weeks?" My dad looked at me like I was being unreasonable. "Stephanie and I thought this would be the best solution. Mark has his own life now. Plus, I'm sure you can manage. You're more than capable." More than capable. More than capable of what? Taking care of their mess? I wasn't their nanny. I wasn't some unpaid caretaker who existed to serve their needs while they gallivanted around the world. And that's when I realized something. I wasn't even part of this family anymore. I had been replaced. I wasn't a priority. I wasn't a part of their plans. I was just the invisible daughter, the one who had been abandoned without anyone even noticing. The hurt and anger were overwhelming. I couldn't believe this was happening. I had given so much, sacrificed my time, my space, my life. And for what? To be treated like I was just an afterthought? The truth was, I didn't matter anymore. Not to my dad, not to Stephanie, not to anyone. When they left for their honeymoon, I spent the next 2 weeks in that house, taking care of their kids. but every moment felt like a slap in the face. I realized that I had been living a lie, pretending everything was okay when in reality, my family had turned its back on me. It was clear that they didn't care about me the way they cared about each other. It wasn't just the way my dad treated me, but how Stephanie and the kids had infiltrated every inch of my life. It wasn't long before I reached my breaking point. I was tired of being ignored, tired of being used, and most of all, I was tired of pretending that this was the family I had always wanted. I wasn't going to be their doormat anymore. I wasn't going to just accept being treated as second best. Something had to change, and that change would start with me. It's funny how quickly life can change. One minute, I was living the life of a dutiful daughter. The next, I was just a tool, a resource for everyone else to use without even a second thought. I knew that something had shifted when Stephanie started making little comments about money, just casual, offhand remarks that made my stomach churn. The first one came a few weeks after my dad and her returned from their honeymoon. I was in the kitchen grabbing a snack before work when she said, "You know, Emily, I've been trying to figure out how to stretch the budget for the month. Ben and Lily have really expensive tastes." I laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke. "What do you mean?" "They're just kids," she smirked, leaning against the counter. "Well, they've been asking for new phones, and since you're living here, maybe you can help contribute." I blinked, the words ringing in my ears. "What? Help contribute?" I repeated, trying to make sense of what she was implying. "You want me to pay for their phones?" Her tone didn't falter. "Well, you're old enough to have a steady job now. It's just a suggestion. We're all part of the family, after all." Part of the family. I couldn't help but scoff inwardly. If I was part of the family, why was I being treated like a second-class citizen? And why was I the one being asked to pay for things that weren't my responsibility? At first, I didn't say anything. I couldn't quite process what she was asking, and it caught me off guard. The next few days, though, things started to escalate. I came home from work one evening to find my dad sitting in the living room staring at his phone while Stephanie was flipping through a stack of bills on the table. "Emily," my dad said, his voice casual, "we've got to talk about something." I took a deep breath and sat down, already feeling that familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. I was prepared for another one of their awkward family meetings, but what I wasn't prepared for was what happened next. "We've been looking over the budget," Stephanie started, her voice smooth and rehearsed, "and we think it would really help if you could chip in a bit more for the household expenses, just until we're back on our feet." "Chip in?" I repeated, my voice tight. "What are you talking about?" "Well," Stephanie continued, "you've been living here rent-free for a while now, and we just need a little help with the bills. The electricity, the groceries. Ben and Lily are getting older, and they're costing more. It would be really nice if you could contribute something to help with all of that." I felt my face go hot, my hands gripping the edge of the couch. This wasn't a request. This wasn't even a conversation. It was an ultimatum. "Wait, so now I'm paying for all of this?" I asked, barely containing the anger that was bubbling inside me. "You want me to pay rent on top of everything else? Are you serious?" "Well, Emily," my dad said, avoiding my gaze, "it's just a temporary thing. We're not asking for much. Just a little contribution, you know." A temporary thing. That phrase again. It was always temporary when it came to my needs, my space, my life. But when it came to everything else, Stephanie's kids, her life, there was no temporary. She expected it all the time, without hesitation. But I was done being the good daughter, the one who sacrificed for the family. I was done being the one who had to pick up the pieces every time they needed something. They never asked me what I needed. No one cared that I was struggling to balance everything, the cost of living on my own, the pressure of trying to build a career while being constantly asked to shoulder the burdens of their choices. "Why don't you and Stephanie pay for it?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Why is it always me who has to help out? I'm not your bank." Stephanie, who had been sitting quietly beside my dad, stiffened. "It's not like that, Emily," she said in a calm, patronizing tone. "We're just asking for a little help. We're family." Family. The word stung more than it should have. I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm not family, am I?" "Not really," I said, standing up and pacing across the room. "You don't treat me like family. You treat me like your personal ATM." That was when my dad's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite read. Regret? Guilt? I wasn't sure. He didn't say anything, though. He never did. After that night, things got worse. I was expected to cover more and more of the bills without any acknowledgement from my parents that they had put me in an impossible position. I started getting calls from creditors, and every time I tried to explain that I was struggling too, they didn't care. They just saw a paycheck, a person they could exploit for a few extra dollars. I worked 2 jobs now just to keep up. One at a local coffee shop in the mornings and another in the evenings at a small retail store. Every paycheck I received went straight to bills. My bills and theirs. And every time I handed over money for groceries, electricity, or whatever else they needed, I could feel the weight of it growing heavier. I wasn't just paying for my part of the household anymore. I was paying for their lifestyle. I was paying for Stephanie's idea of what a perfect family should be. The final straw came when Stephanie started asking me to pay for more specific things for her kids. Ben's baseball equipment, Lily's new school clothes. I had my own expenses. I couldn't afford this. I was drowning, and they didn't even notice. "I don't have the money for this," I said one evening, holding up the receipt for Ben's new gear. "I'm not paying for this. I'm barely making it by as it is." "Well, you should have thought of that before you agreed to live here rent-free," Stephanie said coldly. "It's time to step up, Emily. This is your family now. We all help each other." Family. The word was like acid on my tongue. My family. The family that treated me like a stranger who had taken everything from me and given nothing back. The family that expected me to sacrifice everything for their happiness while I was left to rot in the corner. That night, I packed my things. I didn't know where I was going, but I wasn't staying here anymore. I wasn't going to be their financial crutch, their scapegoat, their unpaid help. It was time for me to take control. I was done. But as I stood at the door, ready to leave everything behind, one final thought struck me. They were never going to stop. They would always expect me to give, to bend, to break for their convenience. And that, more than anything, made me realize that the only way out was to break free entirely. They had taken enough from me. It was time to take back what was mine. I never thought my family could betray me in such a way. Sure, they had ignored my needs, made me feel like an afterthought, but I didn't think they could go so far as to openly use me, lie to me, and take advantage of my loyalty. But they did. It was a week after I packed my things and left. I found a small apartment downtown, tucked away from the chaos of the house I had once called home. It was a fresh start, or at least it was supposed to be. But as I settled in, trying to focus on my work and figure out how to make my life truly mine, my phone kept ringing. It was my dad. I didn't pick up at first, but after the fourth missed call, I finally answered, hoping for an apology or an explanation. What I got instead was far worse. "Emily, where are you?" My dad's voice was strained, almost desperate. "I'm at my apartment, Dad," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "I told you I couldn't keep living there. You can't just leave like that. This isn't the way a family behaves." His voice was laced with frustration, but there was something else there too. Something cold and accusatory. "You're being unreasonable." Unreasonable. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. It was always me, the one who was unreasonable, the one who didn't fit into their neat little box. But I refused to back down. "You've made it clear that I don't matter, Dad," I said, my voice trembling. "I've spent years trying to make this work, but you don't see me. You only see what you want to see. Stephanie and the kids are your priority, and I'm just here." "That's not fair," he said, his voice rising. "You're my daughter. I've tried to help you, but you've pushed me away. Now you're going to ruin everything for all of us." For a moment, I was quiet. His words stung, but they were nothing compared to the truth I had already accepted. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice low. "I've pushed you away. But it's because you've never truly been here for me. Not the way I needed you." Before my dad could respond, I ended the call. I wasn't going to keep having the same argument. I had tried so many times to explain how I felt, but he never listened. He just assumed I was the one in the wrong, that I was the one causing the rift. But it wasn't me. It was them. All of them. Over the next few days, I tried to block out the noise. I didn't want to deal with my family anymore, but that was easier said than done. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from Stephanie. Most of them were short, passive-aggressive messages. "When are you coming home? Ben and Lily miss you. This isn't good for the family, Emily." And then there was the text that made my stomach drop. "You need to pay your share of the bills. You've been living here rent-free long enough. We're struggling." My heart raced as I read the words. I couldn't believe it. They were still expecting me to pay. After everything they'd done, they were demanding more from me? I had already paid with my time, my energy, my money, and now they were trying to bleed me dry emotionally and financially. They weren't just asking for help anymore, they were demanding it. I didn't respond right away. I needed to think. I knew what would happen if I gave in. It would be just like before, except this time, I wasn't going to let them have that control over me again. I decided to take a stand once and for all. But then the bombshell came. I was at work when I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, but something told me to answer. I picked up, and what I heard made my world spin. "Hello, is this Emily?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar. "Yes, who is this?" I asked, trying to place the voice. "This is Mark, Stephanie's ex-husband." My stomach dropped. Mark had never been a part of my life since he and Stephanie divorced years ago. He was a ghost from a past I had never wanted to revisit. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I think you should know something." He sounded calm, almost too calm. "I've been contacted by some people from your dad's side of the family." I froze. "What are you talking about?" "I've heard a lot about the situation with you and your family. It's gotten pretty ugly, hasn't it?" "Yeah," I said, my heart racing. "It has, but I don't know what this has to do with you. I think you should know, Emily, that your dad and Stephanie have been hiding some things. They've been pretending everything is fine, but it's not. They've been using you as a scapegoat for their own messes." I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" "They're in serious debt, Emily. They've been asking you to pay for things that are their responsibility, not yours. They're drowning in bills and they've been hiding it from you." I was stunned. All this time, I had been thinking they just wanted to manipulate me for money. But now it seemed like they were using me to cover up their own financial failures. "And there's more," Mark continued, his voice heavy with hesitation. "I know this is hard to hear, but they've been lying to you, to everyone. They're in so deep that they've been stealing from people, using their family name to cover up their tracks. And I think you need to know the truth." The words hit me like a tidal wave. I couldn't breathe. My father, the man I had trusted my whole life, the one who had promised me everything would be okay, he had been lying to me. All those years of feeling like an outsider, of wondering why my dad never really saw me, they were because of this, because of his lies, his deceit. Mark continued, his voice now sounding almost apologetic. "I never wanted to get involved, Emily, but I think you deserve to know. They're playing you, and they're playing everyone else in their lives." I hung up the phone, feeling dizzy. I wasn't sure what to do next. All this time, I had thought my dad's abandonment was a result of my own failures. But now I saw the truth. He didn't just abandon me, he abandoned everyone. And he had been doing it for years. I was left standing there, alone, with the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. My family had taken everything I had given, and now they were trying to take the one thing I couldn't afford to lose: my peace of mind. But I couldn't keep living like this. I needed to confront them. That night, I called my dad. I was shaking, but I had to do this. I had to know the truth, even if it meant losing everything. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice cold. "What have you been hiding from me?" There was silence on the other end, and then finally my dad spoke, his voice thick with guilt. "Emily, please, I didn't want you to know. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." The truth was out. My father wasn't just emotionally absent. He was a liar, a manipulator. And now, I had to decide what to do with this information. Would I continue to be the daughter he wanted me to be, or would I break free, once and for all? I didn't have an answer yet, but one thing was clear. This was my turning point. This was when I would take control of my life, and whatever came next, I wasn't going to let them dictate it any longer. I had spent so many years trying to hold everything together, trying to keep the peace, trying to be the daughter my father wanted me to be. But after Mark's call, everything had changed. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't just about the way they had used me and manipulated me. It was about the deep betrayal I had felt, the betrayal that had been quietly building for years, and that I had finally been forced to see for what it was. The next day, I called my dad. I had to confront him. I couldn't let it fester any longer. My heart pounded as I dialed his number, my hands shaking. I knew this would be difficult, but I had to do it. I couldn't let them control me anymore. When he picked up, his voice was tentative. "Emily, what's going on?" "I've been trying to reach you." "I know," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "We need to talk." There was a long pause. "About what?" "About everything, Dad. About the lies. About the money. About how you've treated me." He sighed heavily on the other end of the line. "Emily, I don't know what you're talking about. You've been distant for months now. Why are you doing this?" I felt a deep well of frustration rise in me. He was still deflecting, still trying to put the blame on me. It was always the same. Nothing was ever his fault. "No, Dad," I said, my voice tight with anger. "You've been using me, you and Stephanie. You've been asking me to pay for everything, and you've been pretending everything's fine. But I know the truth now. I know about your debt, about your lies. I know you've been stealing from people, using me to cover it up, and I'm done." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. I could hear my dad breathing heavily, and I knew he was trying to find a way to justify himself. But I wasn't going to let him. Not this time. "I don't know what you're talking about, Emily," he said finally, his voice shaky. "You're making things worse. I was doing what I thought was best for all of us. You don't understand. Stephanie and I have been struggling." "You've been struggling?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been struggling because of your own choices. And now, you want me to keep cleaning up your mess? I've been paying for your mistakes. paying for everything you and Stephanie have needed. But you've never once asked if I'm okay. You've never once thought about what I needed. Emily. His voice wavered, but I didn't let him finish. I had heard enough. No, Dad, I interrupted. I'm done. I've been carrying you and Stephanie for too long. I've been paying for everything. Your bills, your groceries, your kids' needs, and I've been drowning under it all. But that stops now. There was a long silence. I could feel his guilt, his hesitation, but it didn't matter anymore. I had finally found my voice. You want me to help? You want me to pay for your mistakes? I said, my words sharp. I'm not doing it anymore. I've given enough. I've sacrificed enough, and you've never once appreciated it. This is my breaking point, Dad. I could hear him breathing heavily, but he didn't say anything. The silence between us stretched on, and for the first time in my life, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. I wasn't at their mercy anymore. I was finally taking back what was mine. I'm cutting you off, I said, my voice steady now. I'm not giving you any more money. I'm not helping with your bills. I'm done. You and Stephanie can figure it out on your own. Emily, please, my dad pleaded, his voice breaking. Don't do this. We're family. Family? I scoffed. You don't get to use that word anymore. You've shown me over and over again that I'm not family to you. I'm just a pawn in your game, and I'm not playing anymore. I could hear him trying to speak again, but I wasn't going to let him. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me any longer. You made your choices, Dad, and now I'm making mine, I said firmly. I'm done being your fallback. I'm done being your financial safety net. I'm done being invisible. With that, I hung up the phone. I didn't need to hear another word. I had finally made the hardest decision of my life, but it was the right one. I was done letting them use me. I was done sacrificing my happiness for a family that had never truly cared about me. The next few days were a blur of tension and emotions. I focused on my work, throwing myself into my freelance projects, and spent time with friends who had been supportive during the past few months. But the weight of the decision still lingered. I had cut off my family, my own father, and I didn't know how to process it. Then, a week later, I received a text from Stephanie. It was a simple message, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. Emily, you need to come home. We can't do this without you. Please, your dad is a wreck. I read the message over and over again, my heart heavy with anger and frustration. It was the same old tactic, the guilt trip. They didn't care about me. They cared about what I could provide for them, but I wasn't falling for it anymore. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their toxic cycle of dependency and manipulation. The final straw came when I received a call from my dad. His voice was frantic, but I wasn't about to let him guilt trip me into returning. Emily, please, we need your help, he begged. I know I've made mistakes, but I can't do this without you. You've never done anything without me, Dad, I said, my voice cold. You've always relied on me to fix your mistakes, but I'm not doing it anymore. You made your choices, and now you need to face the consequences. I'm sorry, my dad said softly, his voice broken. I didn't know what else to do. I thought if I kept everything together, if I kept pretending everything was fine, it would work out. I didn't mean to hurt you. Then why did you? I asked, my heart aching with the rawness of it all. Why didn't you ever think about me? Why didn't you ever stop and ask if I was okay? If I needed something? I've been here all along, Dad, but you never saw me. You only saw what you needed from me. His silence said everything. I knew he was sorry, but it was too little, too late. I can't fix this anymore, I said quietly. And I'm not going to try. I've been trying to be the person you wanted me to be, but I need to be the person I need to be now. And that person isn't someone who sacrifices everything for people who don't care about me. With that, I ended the call. It was final. There was no turning back. I had severed the ties that had been holding me in place, holding me back. And now I was free. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. The anger, the frustration, the hurt. It was still there, but I had learned to let it go. I had taken control of my own life, and no one, no family, no one, could take that from me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was finally living. In the weeks that followed, I took a deep breath and let myself heal. I threw myself into my work, into my passion, something I had neglected for too long. My freelance career, something I had been too afraid to truly pursue before, blossomed in ways I hadn't imagined. Without the constant stress of trying to make everyone else happy, I was able to focus on what truly mattered to me. I began taking on more clients, working late into the night, but feeling a sense of fulfillment I had never felt before. I was doing something that was mine. I was creating, building a career from the ground up, and it felt incredible. The tightness in my chest, the one I had carried around for years, finally began to loosen. I was free, and the apartment that had felt so empty in the beginning, it was becoming my sanctuary. The place I had chosen for myself was now filled with my own things, my own life. The walls no longer felt cold and unfamiliar. They felt like home. I decorated it with things that made me happy, pictures of friends, small tokens of success that reminded me of how far I had come. Every morning I woke up to the life I had fought for. I couldn't ignore the changes in me. I had always been afraid to step out of the shadow of my family, to stand up for myself and demand what I deserved. But now I was standing taller. I was becoming someone I was proud of. The road to get here hadn't been easy, but it was mine. I had carved it out with my own hands, and no one could take that from me. Then the unexpected happened. One day, I received an email from a major marketing agency. They had heard about my freelance work and wanted to meet. It felt like a dream, something too good to be true. But I was done second-guessing myself. I made the appointment. I went in. And by the end of that week, I had signed a contract that would take my career to new heights. They were offering me a full-time position, something I had only ever dreamed of. I signed the contract with a sense of pride and accomplishment, knowing this was only the beginning. I didn't need anyone's approval to succeed. I had done it on my own. And then came the biggest moment. I stood in front of the full team at the agency's first meeting. They had asked me to present a new marketing strategy for one of their top clients, something I had poured my heart into. I had worked for weeks to perfect it, and now here I was, standing on my own in front of people who didn't know the old me, the one who had lived in the shadows of family expectations. This was me, the real me, the one I had fought to become. The meeting went better than I could have imagined. I nailed the presentation, my ideas being met with nods of approval and excitement. They wanted to implement everything I had suggested. By the end of it, I felt a rush of pride, a sense of power I had never known. That night, I called my best friend. I couldn't wait to tell her. "You won't believe it," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "I did it. I really did it. They loved my ideas." She laughed, the sound of her joy filling the phone. "Of course they did. You've always been amazing, Emily. You just had to believe it." I did. I finally believed in myself. But the greatest achievement wasn't the job or the recognition or even the money, it was the peace. It was the knowledge that I didn't need to rely on anyone else anymore. I had broken free from the chains of my past. The lies, the guilt, the manipulation. Those things didn't define me anymore. I was defining myself. A few months later, I moved into a bigger apartment, one that felt even more like home. I decorated it carefully, choosing pieces that reflected who I had become. No more shadows, no more guilt. I had my own space now, my own future, and it was all mine. I didn't talk to my family much after that. There were a few texts from Stephanie and my dad, but I didn't respond. They had crossed a line with me, and I knew that no apology would ever erase the damage they had done. I had made my choice, and now I was living the life I deserved. And then one evening, my phone rang. It was my dad. I hesitated before picking up. I had moved on, and part of me wasn't sure if I was ready to hear what he had to say. "Emily," he said, his voice quiet and tentative, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. I realize now that I messed up. I took you for granted, and I was wrong. I'm sorry." For a moment, I was silent, the words sinking in. I hadn't expected an apology. I had expected more excuses, more manipulation. But here it was, raw and honest. "I don't know what to say, Dad," I said, my voice soft. "I've spent years trying to make this work. But you didn't see me. You didn't care about me the way I needed you to. I can't keep pretending everything is okay." "I understand," he replied. "I don't expect anything from you, but I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I wish I had done better by you." I took a deep breath. "I'm glad you understand," I said, my voice calm. "But I've moved on, Dad. I've made a life for myself, and I'm happy now." And with that, I ended the conversation. I wasn't angry. I didn't need to be. I had come to terms with what had happened, and I had built something stronger because of it. As I sat in my apartment that night, looking out the window at the city lights, I realized something. I had spent so many years waiting for someone else to save me, to love me, to make me feel like I mattered. But in the end, I had saved myself, and that was enough. I had everything I needed now, and I was finally at peace. I had made it,